Protestants don't have an infallible magisterium, therefore they can't say anyone else is wrong, because after all, it's just your interpretation versus theirs. I hear arguments like this all the time, but if we look at it for like more than 2 seconds, it doesn't really make sense. We can know things, even that are matters of interpretation, without an infallible magisterium, and we could still say someone's right or wrong. Here's an example. Imagine someone said to you, C.S. Lewis doesn't believe in hell, and they pull a couple quotes, and person B says, C.S. Lewis does believe in hell, and they pull a couple quotes. You don't need an infallible magisterium to know if one person's right or wrong. Even the fact that they could disagree doesn't mean that there's not an objectively right answer. It also doesn't mean that even though they're interpretations of his texts, that there isn't a right or wrong interpretation. You could have confidence without an infallible ruling to say, yeah, C.S. Lewis did believe in hell. After all, he wrote a whole book on it. And so, while it might be helpful to have an infallible magisterium for certain things, it doesn't mean that if we don't have one, it's all just a matter of opinion.
So to an extent, this is actually true, and I would agree with it insofar as this is a legitimate response to what some Catholics present as an argument for the magisterium. The problem here with Austin, the Protestant in the video, is that it is responding to Catholics who offer a very poor articulation for the magisterium. It's certainly true that you don't necessarily need a magisterium and an infallible interpreter to know anything about divine revelation. I mean, it's clear you can open up the Bible and know that the Holy Family fled to Egypt, and you don't really need an interpreter for that point. But I think what Austin is missing is that he's addressing kind of the low-hanging fruit arguments for the magisterium, rather than addressing a more steelman presentation for the Catholic teaching authority of the magisterium. A more steelman approach would say that ultimately you need a magisterium, number one, to identify what is divine revelation. I mean, if I think this book belongs in the Bible and Austin thinks it doesn't, what do we do at that point? And number two, once we get past the issue of which books belong in the Bible and what constitutes divine revelation. Yes, there are some things you don't really need an authoritative judgment on to properly understand it, let alone an infallible judgment. Things that are very explicit and self-evident in Scripture, for example. But there are some areas of Scripture that are incredibly vital. They are very important matters pertaining to the doctrine of justification, for example. And they're not always very clear in Scripture. So you can't just say, well, the Bible's very clear on X, Y, and Z. Not always. And you can't dismiss this by saying, well, X, Y, and Z doesn't really matter. We can agree to disagree. No, some are going to say this is absolutely essential to the gospel, whether we get this right or wrong. And so at that point, it would be helpful and rather even necessary to have some kind of authoritative judgment that can bind consciences. It doesn't necessarily have to do so infallibly, although it could, and that would be great. But even if it doesn't exercise that level of authority, even if it just exercises its authority to a lesser degree, non-infallibly, that would be sufficient, because for those who would accept the magisterium, they're going to accept that judgment as binding on their conscience, and they're going to yield their personal interpretation and their personal opinion to that authority. And that is what the magisterium can do in matters that are in dispute that you don't have in Protestantism. So I think that is a point that you would need to see some more interaction with from the Protestants. Has someone ever come to you and spoken about contradictions in the Catholic Church's magisterium? I'm really excited to tell you that I'm going to be exploring magisterial difficulties and various ways in which people have attempted to harmonize tensions that can be found in the magisterium, in the teachings of the Catholic Church. We're going to explore these tensions in quite a few areas: slavery, the death penalty, religious liberty, and many other topics. I'm going to do this in 2 lectures that you can attend with me live on video, and you can ask me questions at the end. There will be 2 lectures, 50 minutes each with a 15-minute break in between, and 30 minutes for Q&A at the end, where you can ask me any question about the topic that you would like. If you would like to attend, it's going to be on April 26th at 12 p.m. Central, and you can join me live via video. You'll also be able to come back and watch the video at a later time, because it will be posted as a course. So if you miss it live, you can still see the video later on. I hope you get a chance to check it out: Magisterial Difficulties, exploring the tensions and the documents of the church. And right now there's an early bird discount going on, so be sure to check it out. I got a link to it in the show description, or visit rtcourses.com for more information. I hope to see you there.